Good morning, everybody. As people are slowly joining the room, welcome to our webinar today. I'm going to wait for a bit more people to join us. Hello, everybody. Very sorry from people visiting from the US. It's very, it's very early this morning. Hello, Imran.
Hi.
Hi. Nice to have you with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, we're very happy you're visiting us in Brussels. We had a fantastic talk with your team, talking about DSA regulation. We might touch on all of this stuff in a few moments. Before we start this, you know this as our fellow webinar participants. You know that we don't use the Q&A in Zoom. We use Slido for all of our questions. So can you go on slido.com and put the tag DisinfoLab? And we would love to know where you're joining from today. I do see 26 participants to that meeting, so 27 now. So this means that we need to have 27 responses to that part. So please join us at slido.com, #DisinfoLab, just to know where you're joining from today. So today we're very happy to have the Center for Countering Digital Hate with us. So we are with Imran Ahmed, Chief Executive Officer, CEO, it says, of the CCDH. So Imran, you are the founder, actually, of the CCDH, and you have been there in that space for a few years now, looking into how things like identity-based hate, extremism, disinformation, conspiracy theories are spreading online and the kind of harms that they are causing. And we'll mention that these harms are not only online harms, they also have sometimes physical consequences. And we need to merge these two words. You've been founding CCDH just after, I think, the murder of Joe Cox in the UK and the Brexit.
Well, that was the signal to me that online harms have a real offline cost that can be paid in lives. You know, CCDH was set up 7 years ago because we saw the growth of anti-Semitic conspiracism in the UK on the left. We saw simultaneously the weaponization of disinformation and hate. Actually, that had a precursor in the Scottish referendum in 2014, but in 2016 it had been ramped up into a weaponized, refined version for the referendum. And a man who was persuaded that the EU was trying to import Muslims to destroy the English race was sufficiently emboldened by that disinformation, the disinformation that always underpins hate, to murder a mother of two. And in our collective grief at seeing politics in the UK degraded on both the left and right to such an extent, I felt nothing but shame. Because when I was first told about Britain First, that's what her murderer, what Joe's murderer shouted as he killed her. Britain First was the first political movement to achieve 1 million likes on Facebook. And this was my response. They've got 1 million clicks. We've got 500,000 members knocking on doors. Who cares about them? And you know, at that point, that was a rational conclusion. A lot of us were saying things like that. This is just clicktivists. But what we'd missed, and what I think both our organizations were set up to look at, is the fact that the primary locus by then of information exchange, of the setting of social mores, the norms of attitude and behavior, the negotiation of political values and the values that underpin that nurture our democracies, even negotiating the corpus of information that we call facts, truth and lies, that had shifted to these online spaces and we were missing it. And even now, I think there's you and I know, like, we still have to do the persuasion work, right? Which is crazy, the basic science. Like in climate, the equivalent would be persuading people that burning fossil fuels creates CO2, CO2 warms the earth. The basic underpinning science to the work that we do is that online harms have an offline cost, and that these are amplified and on platforms that give the whip hand, that give the advantage to disinformation and hate over good information and tolerance. But then we have a long way to go now, and that's why both our organizations are so aligned in this mission of trying to find levers for dealing with a potentially enormous species level harm of disinformation undermining civilizational progress and democracy at a fundamental values level throughout the world.
Thank you. I think it feels good to hear this and to hear that we are not alone. And I'm sure, like many of the participants of the webinars, we need to remind this because, as Imran, you said, like sometimes we have to go back to school and to retell what is for us obvious. Today, Imran, you come to explain and to present the latest study of the CCDH and of your team, which is called Stop Toxic Twitter. What is it? Tell us more.
So, you know, when Elon Musk took over, we've always said that we have a trust but verify model. Like, companies say a lot of stuff. They have very expensive PR people. And we know from experience that some of what they say is ironically disinformation. There's a lot of disinformation about disinformation. And we wanted to find a rational measure initially just to test whether or not Elon Musk's initial proclamations to advertisers that he understood that if there are no consequences for hate, he said, that would create a hellscape. So we wanted to see this guy who's come in both saying that to advertisers and saying another thing to, you know, we know that he was flirting with people that spread hate. I argued he put up the bat signal by saying this is going to be a free speech zone. We wanted to quantify, well, is there a way that we can quantify whether or not it has turned into a hellscape, it's turning into a hellscape, or in fact, he's following through on his promises to advertisers. So our initial piece of work, which got a lot of attention, I think because it was very fast and reactive and rapid, and you and I have talked about the importance of being quick on the scene with hard data, was to try and quantify using Brandwatch. So Brandwatch is an industry-grade tool that allows advertisers to see whether or not terms that they care about are trending, including their brand name, but also, you know, whether or not sneakers are big right now, or people are talking about X or Y or Z. And we said, well, why don't we just pretend that our brands are horrible words? So I think it's the next slide actually, which shows when we put in those terms, the N word, I don't really want to sort of go through them. I don't like doing this, but you know, misogynist words, anti-LGBTQ plus words, anti-Black words. We then said, well, look, what was the volume of those before he took over? What was the volume of those after he took over? So these are daily averages. We saw that there was a Musk bump across all of them. So there was a 200% increase. That means 300% of the original volume, 3 times the original volume of use of anti-Black words. Now, what's important about that is specifically after he took over. You can't say this is Black Twitter and people just using that term because it's a term that they've reclaimed for themselves. There's no other explanation for that massive, significant increase post takeover beyond that. This is people feeling empowered to do so. And that research got a lot of attention, as you can imagine. You know, we were asked to do this on television, and actually the hardest question I got was, does this prove that Elon Musk is, why is Elon Musk doing this? Is he just a right-winger? Does he hate Black people? Does he hate gay people? And I would always say, I don't know. I can't tell you what's in the hearts of someone, of another person. I'm not a mind reader. I suspected I knew the answer, which is that it was all about money, and that he saw a business model, an opportunity in taking the content that was being pushed off other platforms, that people didn't feel empowered to write on other platforms. Even, I mean, you and I know that there's very poor rule enforcement on Facebook and other platforms as well, but that because there was some enforcement, that it set the sort of expectations that you can't do that there, that he was actually taking advantage of that content and monetizing it. And so the next thing was, because I couldn't answer that question, the question I put to the team was, can we prove that he is monetizing hate? Is he? I mean, is he not? Are they actually pulling the ads off hate? Are they being cautious about it? Because advertisers, he's already told advertisers, I'm going to do my utmost to make sure that we don't have this proliferation of hate on the platform. And that's what the report that we put out a few weeks ago, Toxic Twitter, so how Twitter generates millions in ad revenue by bringing back banned accounts, was all about. And it was done as part of the Stop Toxic Twitter Coalition, which is a US primarily coalition. I'm based in Washington, DC, as you know. We're a US 501c3, and it's a coalition that we've got with organizations like Free Press, which is a fantastic organization, with Jessica Gonzalez there, with the Media Masters for America, Sir Angelo, and Accountable Tech. So that coalition is trying to persuade advertisers to take a second look at Twitter as a platform for advertising. And if they feel that there is a threat to their brand values by the content on there, to then pull their ads, to send a message through their spending. So we pulled some data together. I'll give it a bash. So, right, start at the beginning. Elon Musk, he announced a general amnesty for banned users in November 22. So Musk went through a series of weird PR-driven, at the sort of speed of the Twitter news cycle, which is near instantaneous, that breathless coverage that you see on the media about what Twitter is doing today and what Elon Musk is saying, as wrong-headed, as meaningless, as full of flatulent, irrelevance, as say trying to follow Trump's tweets and trying to divine exegetically some sense or some understanding of what this man really wants and what this man's policies really are. He had announced the general amnesty for banned Twitter users. He had mere months, weeks earlier said that he was going to have a council that was initially going to have of civil rights bodies, which were going to look at these accounts and work out who should be let back on. And then he said he's going to have a general amnesty. And he was simultaneously telling advertisers, don't worry, we've told them that they can't be naughty again and we will enforce our rules. We knew that wasn't true. We knew that these neo-Nazis, white supremacists, misogynists, the conspiracists, the anti-LGBTQ plus hate spreaders, that they were behaving in a bad way again. And so we took 10 of them and we analyzed, first of all, are there ads appearing next to that content? And the second thing was, the truth is that our access to the Twitter API has been getting weaker for a long time now. Actually, I can't comment on it too much, but we have actually been in a legal dispute as well, that Twitter is putting pressure on intermediary companies to make it harder for non-profits like ours, civil society bodies, watchdogs, to use intermediary tools to access the Twitter API. So they're actually making it more and more opaque a platform under Musk. But one thing that they had done was, Musk wanted to be able to sort of boast about his visibility, tell his mates, I've had 100 million views on my latest tweet. So he put viewer numbers on there, kind of bragging rights for himself. For most people, you get, I get 10 views because no one actually, thankfully, follow. I'm very boring on Twitter. Social media is not my milieu. I like talking, but I'm old. I don't text very much. I don't know how to use emojis, as my team know. I'm still very incompetent at them. So my tweeting is very boring, but he gets lots of tweets. But now that they've got tweet impressions, we can scrape that data and work out for these newly reinstated accounts, how many impressions have they had in total? So we looked at these 10 accounts, and they'd amassed 2.5 billion tweet impressions since Twitter rolled out publicly visible impression counts on the 15th of December. I mean, that's an enormous amount of visibility for 10 accounts, malignant content, 10 known malignant accounts that had been permabanned previously. That tracks over to 20 billion over the course of a year. So that's a simple calculation there. People like Andrew Tate, you know, what can I say? The influencer, my team have put influencer, a former kickboxer. He's just a horrible woman-hating scumbag who says things like rape victims bear some responsibility for being raped. He'd been permanently suspended before. He has had massive influence. I gave a speech at a school a couple of months ago for a friend who's a teacher there, all boys school in Luton, a state school, a government school, but it terrified me, the extent to which those boys had seen the content that this guy is producing and had really been re-socialized in their understanding of what it means to be a man and what it means to how men should interact with women, how men should form relationships with women. You know, it's a really desiccated view of what it means to be a person, what it means to be a man as well. And it's a worldview that can only lead to relationships that are based on dominance, violence, either physical or other types of violence, and mean that those boys who are just 13, 14 will grow up and may never be able to have what I think is the most powerful thing in my life, which is to have a relationship that makes us more than the sum of our parts. It's the best thing that ever happened to me. And it makes me really sad that those boys won't, and it's because of this wanker. Forgive the Britishism for more delicate types. Gateway Pundit, everyone knows TGP, as we call it internally, because we're down with the kids. We use the acronym, which is a really nasty, very, very pointed, very clever misinformation outlet. Robert Malone, anti-vaxxer, Andrew Anglin, the founder of the Daily Stormer, prominent neo-Nazi, Esmeralda Robinson, another sort of COVID disinformation, Rogan O'Hanley, again, vaccine conspiracies, who spread a load of nonsense about Damar Hamlin, who was the NFL athlete who had, I mean, if any of you, because I live in the States and I'm married to an American, I'm trying to learn about the NFL, which to me is completely bonkers. But that guy got hit like a steam train by a human being twice my size and suffered a cardiac arrest, and we're told it's because of the vaccine. Peter McCullough, another COVID disinformer, Stu Peters, who produced Died Suddenly, which is this mad thing about how sudden deaths are actually all caused by COVID. Riza Islam, who's part of our Disinformation Dozen, which is probably CCDH's most covered report, which was the 12 most influential online anti-vaxxers and how they produce 65%, how they're responsible for 65% of shares of misinformation content online, and Baked Alaska, who's a complete white supremacist, a very dangerous person. So we showed that ads were appearing on there. I think the real magic piece of work was, so once we'd worked out that how many daily impressions these people were getting, we then recorded the Twitter experience. So my team flicked through these people's feeds, these accounts, and then worked out how often do ads appear. And on average, an ad appears every 6.7 tweets. So you can work out then from the number of impressions, how many ads are likely to have appeared. So 54 million, 6.7, every 6.7 impression there's a tweet, there's an ad, sorry. And then we know from publicly available data what the CPM is, so the cost per 1,000 impressions is of advertising on Twitter. And we can therefore multiply out from impressions to the average number of impressions per ad and the average cost of an ad to a number. And that was $19 million for 10 accounts. And that answers the question, you know, one of the things that I've always argued about the disinformation racket is that, you know, we've got two problems. We've got the spreaders of distribution, the producers of distribution of disinformation. We've got the distributors of disinformation, and both sides are profiting, either economically, politically, reputationally, whatever. But the platforms are doing it because it's good business. And because right now, the economics of disinformation are that if you're a social media platform, if you take an enforcement action, you reduce the amount of monetizable content, right? So that's a reduced revenues. Plus you have to take an action, and every action is costly. You have to have people, you have to have processes, you have to have things have to happen that cost money. So there's a double hit on your bottom line. If you do nothing, well, nothing happens. Unless someone like us is watching and we create those economic, social, and political costs, which is what CCDH's model is, to create those costs, nothing happens. So your fiduciary duty as an executive is to do nothing, because that maximizes shareholder value. And that is that's in part because of Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act 1996 in the US, which immunizes platforms from costs associated with the distribution of potentially harmful content. That is a completely screwy the internal economics for that industry, where none of the negative externalities impose a cost on those companies themselves. And what we've done here is show that that is actually true, that critical part of it, the costs, the potential revenue losses, so the available revenues, if you empower, if you distribute all this content, is quite significant. $19 million a year for just 10 accounts. And when you're Elon Musk and you've sold yourself to the Saudis, and we know what the Saudis do, you know, they have put themselves in a very difficult position. They have $1 billion a year of just debt repayments. Well, this is 2% of that repayment. So very easy to understand why they're doing this. Anyway, I mean, you know, I think quite pithily, my team can explain this. You know, despite previous enforcement action on numerous violations, Twitter will make millions of dollars from a deliberate decision to reinstate accounts that are known to spread hate and dangerous misinformation. And I'm really, really pleased that we were able to provide the evidence that lets you go out and make that statement. When you are asked why Twitter has let back on all these disgusting people that previously they would have considered beyond the pale on their platform, that they didn't want to do business with, which is their fundamental right, of course, their right of free association, why they have gone against other platforms and their own platforms' decisions in the past, you can say confidently with data that Twitter have done it because they're going to make millions from their decision to reinstate these vile accounts that spread hate and dangerous misinformation. And I think, you know, that is a useful contribution to have made. So that's our research. And I hope that it is of use to those who are trying to understand why we are so eager for legislatures to arrogate to themselves the ability to impose costs, because this is really about balancing out, changing the internal calculus of decision-making at Twitter to say, well, sure, you might make 20 million by putting these 10 accounts back on that spread hate and disinformation, that undermines a democracy, that puts lives at risk, this anti-LGBTQ plus hate. You know, in Colorado Springs, there was a human cost to that spreading of narratives that say that gay people and trans people and drag queens are grooming children. There was a human cost to it. What are those lives worth? Now, to Elon Musk, he doesn't care because he knows that he can make money by putting that content back on there and distributing it and benefiting from the controversy it generates. We have every right to say, actually, that $20 million, that is soaked in the blood of innocence. And maybe we want some of it back.
Thank you, Imran. I think it's a very, very good booster shot. As we've been talking a lot about vaccination the past 2-3 years, we need to have this kind of booster shots regularly to not forget the impact of this. We get a lot of questions by many policymakers as well. What's the impact of this? You know, is there a real life impact on all of this? Yes, it is. Yes, it is, and it's dramatic.
But you and I feel this quite intensely. You know, I could tell when we've just been talking for an hour or so, and I think both of us feel quite emotional about the threats to our democracies, the things that make us able to sustain decent and loving and progressive and ever improving societies. And you know, my wife and I having kids, and I think with great regret that we might be a generation that leaves a more fractured, a less healthy ecosystem, an information ecosystem to our kids, not just the physical one, but the information ecosystem too. And that is just such a black mark on, you know, and this generation and what we've done. And so I think it's really important that we do the work and we remind ourselves. And in Europe right now, which is going through the regulation writing process, it's past the DSA and now the regulations are being written. I think it's really important while they're talking to tech companies, while they're being lobbied, 4 of the 5 biggest lobbyists in Brussels are now the tech platforms. They are spending money hand over fist to try and make sure those regulations are as friendly to them as possible. You know, trying to tell people, oh, please be reasonable. You know, you can't impose too many costs on us. We're just poor, desperate social media platforms that want to spread free speech. Just remind them that we are here to deal with real harms. And these people are making a ton of money by creating harm. It is their business model. It's valuable to them.
Yeah, I think what is very central is what you say, because it's really also part of the discussions we're having in Brussels right now. And I'm really encouraging you, everybody, to ask your questions. We already have some questions coming in, so please send your questions on slido.com and use the hashtag DisinfoLab. I think which is very strong with your study, because we've been discussing about why do we need platforms to act on disinformation, on hate speech, because there are some kind of blocking the kind of capacity to spread this at a very fast, very viral level.
Sure.
And what is interesting is now we see in Brussels the kind of movement to start protecting some type of speech against others. And we do see, when we look at the account that you stated, that we have online media, we have influencers, we have all of these people which actually under European law would be considered as media service providers.
Can you imagine if the Gateway Pundit, which is one of the biggest spreaders of the disinformation that underpins hate, of climate denial, of vaccine denial, of all kinds of malignant content, has turned it into a monetized business model? Can you imagine if they were treated as a media provider and therefore exempted from the DSA? That would be a disastrous mistake. And, you know, we're facing this in the UK as well, the online safety bill, this kind of publisher exemption, which is being discussed in the House of Lords when it comes back to Parliament in April. This is a really, really broad exemption that has to be as restricted as possible. Or, I mean, I think some people would argue it should be removed. I would say, look, I'm open to a discussion and negotiation on it. But if you allow the Gateway Pundit to be a publisher, if you allow a neo-Nazi publication to be a publisher, well, then what's the point of your legislation? You've just allowed a coach and horses to be driven through the central thrust, the central plank, the central logic of this legislation that makes it meaningless. So I think it's really, really important that we don't let that happen.
Yes, and we're working on this, and as you may know, we've been working on rejecting the new media exemption that is coming back in the European Media Freedom Act, which will be a huge carve out on the DSA, and we are actually calling for this not to happen, because once we have this, and we also in this in the online safety bill, then we also start to have other exemptions for other type of speech, and then any kind of content moderation of the platforms will be finished, and this is what we will get at a decupled power, because like then platforms will be entitled by law to not act on content moderation anymore.
Yeah, it's like saying, you know, like murder is illegal unless you're in a really bad mood. Yeah, it's kind of, it's a meaning. What's the point? What is the point?
Yes, we have many questions jumping in. I'll start with this one, which is not showing on the screen, so I will try maybe to reload this. How did you choose the 10 restated account you analyzed?
It was just, you know, that we knew that there were serial spreaders of disinformation and that they had a high, they got a lot of impressions. I mean, so there's thousands and thousands of accounts that have been reinstated. We just ordered them by impressions and went from there. So, and we had we knew that, I mean, the truth is that because we're, as an organization, look, we are a public organization, we put ourselves at the risk of litigation every time we say anything, and defamation litigation. So you better be sure that you have a case to call someone a toxic account before you put out a report and then send it to every single newspaper in the world and broadcaster in the world saying, I've just found this. So we knew that we had this might be a very British term, but copper bottomed, that we had a solid case against all of these accounts.
Thank you. To do your calculation, you extrapolate on a full year data you collected in a limited time. How long was the data collection pause?
So we went from 2.5 billion impressions to 20 billion impressions. So I assume that it was about, that's 1/8, and that's so about 6 weeks data.
Okay,
6 weeks, 7 weeks. So a couple of months data, yeah.
Yeah. Very technical question, Imran, so I'm asking them. The CPM has fallen after most took over. Are you sure that your figure is still accurate?
Well, yeah, no, maybe. I mean, like CPM has gone down because
CPM is
the cost per thousand mille.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's the cost. Basically, you pay money per 1,000 impressions, so of your ads, yeah, it's gone down absolutely. And look, I'm really proud of that. Some of the work that we've done, some of the advertisers have cited the data that we showed a tripling in the use of the N-word as the reason why they no longer want to advertise on Twitter. Good. You know, we've affected their bottom line. Good. I'm very happy about that. I'm very proud of that. That's very good work to have done.
Another one, which is, do you think that paying for social media with better models than Twitter Blue could be a good alternative to the current model based on ads? It's a bit far from your expertise, I guess. What could be a good revenue model?
Actually, the thing is, so I started my career at Merrill Lynch, and this is what's crazy. It's like a long 20 years ago, I was in the private sector. And so, yeah, I'm interested in business. I'm interested in the economics of running a business. And I was there. I was at Merrill's in '99, so pre-dot-com boom, in the dot-com boom. And these discussions were being had back then were, how do you build a revenue model for content? And there isn't an easy one beyond advertising, to be frank, because the second that you put up a barrier of asking people to pay for money to use a service meaningfully, you know, would Facebook have close to 3 billion users if people had to pay $5 a month for it? No chance. And they know that. You know, the price elasticity is very, very against any kind of payment model. So I can't see Twitter Blue being particularly successful. And you know, we did some other research which showed that who's taking up Twitter Blue. So we looked at what's the prevalence of disinformation and hateful statements on Twitter Blue users versus non-Twitter Blue users. Substantially higher. I can't remember which. I think we may have placed that exclusively with someone, but I can't remember where.
But that was couple of months ago. We did some, or about a month, maybe 2 months ago, we did some data on that. So yeah, I can't see it being particularly useful. It's being used by people who know that they want to be able to spread disinformation. Yeah.
Thank you. I think there was a question, and we're going to maybe start diving into the European model before. Just have you or other organizations informed advertisers that their pet content is appearing next to the investigated account? And that's a very interesting question, because I saw, for example, the Wall Street Journal advertising on the sideline of the Gateway Pundit.
Hey, you're damn right, we've told them.
What's their reaction?
Look, most of the time they're horrified, or they're, you know, quite often now they don't say anything in response publicly, but we'll have private discussions with people. Our colleagues from the coalition, Stop Toxic Twitter Coalition, have been talking to so everyone's talking to people that they know. We also have got the report out. We've got advertisers. You know, as soon as the report came out, I think the Post covered it. I think that's the research that we did. The Washington Post had the exclusive on it, and then it went all round. When the Post approached a couple of advertisers in their article, the advertiser said, we're pulling our ads immediately. So we knew that we'd cost them money just by putting the article out, because as soon as advertisers were fingered, you know, these are advertisers, these are big international brands. It's Disney, the NFL, the NBA, you know, big companies who do not want to see their brand, in one particularly horrifying instance, their brand underneath Andrew Anglin, standing with the Brandenburg Gate behind him, doing a Nazi salute. How would you feel if you were a brand manager and you saw that in a report that CCDH had put out, you know, across the world's press? Not very happy. So I'm very pleased to be able to make that brand manager's day.
It's interesting, because we are, and it's a bit why we've been advocating so long for regulation around the DSA and to have that kind of proper processes in place, because we cannot go again with all that kind of, you know, this is happening, nobody knows what's happening, and everybody has to flag again and to go to the public eye and to go into like shaming people because they are not actually know how the process is working, know how the system is working, and who's accountable and who is responsible for this.
You know, my very good friend Nandini Jami, she runs, you know, Checkmate. So Nandini's like my little sister. So she brings me homemade granola, and I buy her pizza and make sure she eats properly. She's because she lives close to me in Washington, and she is obviously the master at explaining the ad stack and how the opacity in the system, the multiple layers, the way in which I think some, you know, advertisers kind of know, but they know they've got plausible deniability because of the complexity of the ad stack and the lack of transparency within it. And what CCDH does is cut through all of that by saying, your ad is next to a guy doing the Nazi salute by the Brandenburg Gate. Like, I'm sorry, mate, but you should know better. And actually, you have a moral duty. You're spending your customers' money to pay to monetize hate. How do you think your customers would feel if they know? And that's what we hope to stimulate, because actually these are all complementary. You know, all this is converging, you know, dovetailing activity, the work that you're doing, Nandini is doing, CCDH is doing, because what it does is it forces light through the system. And we're hoping that this burst of sunlight actually makes people like legislators and regulators then put into place meaningful transparency, so that we, you know, that they actually make the sunshine, you know, because we can put floodlights on small parts of the system with the small amount of resources that we have. Between the two of our organizations, we're what, 35, 40 staff in total across two organizations. That's not very much compared to His Majesty's government of the UK or the European Union, the European Commission, or the platforms themselves, which have obscene amounts of money that they could spend on transparency, but choose not to.
And I think it's a perfect bridge to the different reports of the Code of Practice. And we've been discussing this before, just to also put inside and in perspective the resources society has and actually struggling to get to actually just function at a very basic level, versus all the capacity, both in terms of manpower within the platforms, within the regulators, within the institutions, to actually work on that. So we now have in the code of practice on disinformation reports being published, and there was outbursts about Twitter not being able to fill their reports about the code of practice transparency requirements. First, do you have any view on the code of practice? Are you actually studying what different platforms are publishing, and in that case, Twitter? And if you do, just like, did you have any kind of idea of like the effects of this restatement policy?
So when I started CCDH in 2016, we weren't called CCDH. We were just two guys who were really hurt and angry about the people producing the hate. And we went to the platforms first. And we said, look, we've seen all this stuff. We've seen how Facebook groups are being used, how actually they're serially spreading disinformation, contravening your bans by having multiple people posting simultaneously, that they're doing all these tactics. And they said, oh my God, thank you for telling us about this. Would you like to meet with our team in Ireland? Would you like to meet with our team in San Francisco? Here's 20 meetings you can come to. Can you maybe write us a document on this? I spent 2.5, 3 years doing that because I really don't like to believe that people, human beings, can't see the difference between right and wrong. And these companies were masters, as you know, at positioning themselves, at portraying themselves, spending vast amount on PR to make themselves look like young, progressive, civilizing entities that want to support human rights and democracy. And it was only after 2.5, 3 years that I realized that we were being gaslit, that these companies are masters at gaslighting civil society, that the entire policy-making process was a means to contain our criticism and energy within an internal unit at these vast organizations, which could ensure that we never infect the public, the customers, the legislators. And that's why we launched as a public organization in 2019. It was a cry of frustration that we were being gaslit. And then, you know, when we launched publicly, we realized there were lots of us who've been through this. So what's my reaction to what's coming back from the platforms? You know, the initial interim stuff that they've sent through, it's nonsense. What the code of practice, it feels like it's been partially informed by the gaslighting nonsense that we hear from the platforms. And it's really important that they learn that the commission has the capacity to listen, that it's listening to people like you. You know, less so to us, because I think that, you know, like we've done a lot of work in the US and the UK, and we're in Brussels today to speak to you and to speak to some commissioners because they've asked for our perspective. But they need to cut through the nonsense that they're getting and make this a practicable solution. Right now, civil society will not be able to fully engage with this process because they've made it incredibly bureaucratic, incredibly complicated. You were telling about the 800 pages of guidance that you've received. You know, they need to make this easy, versatile, in which very good quality research being done by a range of organizations, not all of whom have the scale to engage with an 800-page disclosure document or anything else that may come along, and be able to input into it and then see meaningful change enacted as a result. I think that we're going to need a lot more, you know, a little bit more for the sort of politics nerds, Mazzucato, and a bit more swashbuckling, flexibility, and integration of civil society, of the public voices into policy and onto the enforcement of their policies and the way that they draft their policies in the short term as well.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think we also sometimes caught into that kind of like the rabbit thing, the car and the lights of the car, and we are just like stuck by all of these things. But like very often, what we are very surprised is like the community here that is countering disinformation, and also with the community countering hate speech, which are like two very close and sometimes overlapping organizations. We do see that a lot of evidence has been produced over the past 6 years about what it causes, what has been done, what has not been done. So like all the evidence has been meticulously been put in the public eye and has been digested and has been reported. And I'm personally very sometimes afraid of like we have to reprove what has been proven again.
But you see, that's part of it. You know, in climate, like, so my dissertation when I was at university was on Jimmy Carter. So Jimmy Carter in 1976 with Schlesinger in his first 100 days went off and wrote a energy policy that was incredibly forward-looking. And he talked about climate change. He actually said, if we don't deal with hydrocarbon diversification, of diversifying away from hydrocarbons, that we're going to end up in wars in countries like Iraq. Yeah, this is 1976. And he knew that something bad was going to happen as a result. Now, look, that policy never got enacted because he was rubbish at politics. He was very good at policy, very bad at politics, and he couldn't actually get stuff through. That's a side note. But we've known the science for a long time. What's happened in modernity in the last 15, 20 years is that the very basic science that underpins the consensus upon which action against climate change has been based, the idea that hydrocarbons release CO2, which then warms the earth, is being fundamentally undermined. They will always seek to undermine people who have their vested interests, their money to defend, their enormous profits to defend, will always seek to undermine the basic truth, the basic facts that underpin, you know, the consensus required for action. Now, we're kind of at that point now in the disinformation space. We've got the consensus required for action, and they're seeking to go back and rewrite facts, rewrite the basis upon which that consensus is built. So you're right, it sucks. It absolutely sucks that we have to go back and remind people of the basics, the core principles, the first principles, day in, day out. But that's our job, right? And you and I are going to keep doing it because we realize that's part of our job. But I think everyone that's watching this, you're here because you kind of know, you know, this is all of our jobs, is to go out and remind the basic science, defend the science. In the same way that in the climate space, the IPCC is the body that defends the basic science, that defends the consensus that's there. I think it's really important that we all go out and remind people about the basic facts that underpin the reason for action.
Yeah. So you mentioned this a little bit. I'm going to ask a question again, like for your work in Europe. So what role does the EU play for the work of the CCDH in the fight against misinformation about COVID-19 and vaccination? Will there be any collaborative projects for you in Europe soon? Is that something that is?
Look, we're always working with people. We're not going to, you know, and public health is a really important space to us. The work that we did on COVID-19 and the vaccine was very meaningful. Personally, I was you know, that was 6 months after we started CCDH as a public organization, the pandemic hit. And so we pivoted everything to look at it because we knew that even though we were set up to look at hate and disinformation that undermines elections, actually the most pressing need was disinformation about the vaccine and about COVID, because that did take millions of lives around the world. But we're always looking to establish meaningful partnerships. Part of the challenge for our sector as a whole is that to have good partnerships, you need a relative amount of scale. Otherwise, partnerships are kind of too light touch and frankly exploitative. And so we've now just about got the scale where we can form meaningful partnerships and start to convene coalitions oriented around action. And you know, the work that you guys do with the annual conference and at the DisinfoLab, I think the fact that you focus so hard on convening is really, really fantastic. We've focused our work on research and legislative action and you know, a particular configuration of levers that we want to pull, like going after advertisers, going after the economics. But there is a really important role for that convening. Happy to work with anyone in short.
Yeah. So just mentioning that because we have also people that are working on pre-banking, etc. So
yeah,
we're happy to put everybody in touch. Contact us, and we'll be happy to put the people in touch with your teams.
Sure.
I think one final question, which is very provocative, and as I love provocative questions. What is a positive conclusion that can be envisioned for Twitter? A space filled only with hate-driven accounts and brands willing to associate with it?
It's not only full of it though. Like, you know, that's the thing with social media. Like, so I moved to the States in June 2020. In the middle of the pandemic, I moved. You know, you couldn't fly from Europe to the US, so I went and I had to go in quarantine for 2 weeks in Cancun.
Yeah,
which was a great quarantine. I don't drink. I was very boring. I mean, I just sat there staring at the sea, writing. Social media was the means by which I connected to people. I was in an apartment in Washington on my own in a country I don't know, with all my friends behind, all my family behind. I've got 6 brothers and sisters. Everyone I love was away from me. And how did we maintain our sanity in that 2 years? Social media was really a vital part of it. But it was also the vector by which so much disinformation was spread, by which hate was spread as well, because in a pandemic, discussed sensitivity is there's a real strong linkage between that heightened discussed sensitivity and xenophobia. It's in the social psychology, so you can look at Michael Bank-Peterson. It's in the neurology. You look at Robert Sapolsky, the co-location of the of discussed sensitivity and in-out group thinking in the insular cortex of the brain. You've got all of that happening simultaneously. And I tend to think that the civilizational hope, the hope that social media actually lets us produce a bigger, more productive, more inclusive dialogue between people, that's what we're aiming for. Like, we're not aiming for the end of social media. We're aiming for social media to fulfill its promise. Before, it was corrupted by oligopolistic commercial imperatives at companies which are too big to fail, are too big to have any connection to the people that they purport to serve. My friend David Young, Lord Young, who actually is from the other side of the political spectrum to me, is conservative. He worked for Thatcher. He was one of Margaret Thatcher's cabinet secretaries. But David Young was a very kind, very loving, and very decent man, and a great businessman. And I asked him once, you're a great businessman, like, what do you think is different about these people? And he said to me, Imran, I used to want to succeed in business because I wanted people in the country club to say, there goes David. He's a good chap. He's going places. The thing with these guys is, though, this Zuckerberg and Dorsey, they don't go to the country club. They own their own country club. The membership is one, and they have no connection. They have no rooting in the needs of society that they say that they are there to serve, that they're part of. And if we can, I think we will have to reimpose, which is our right as democracies, some connection between the needs of the people and the needs of the company. That negotiation, that balance is the heart of democracy. We need more democracy in these companies. And that way, social media might have a chance of fulfilling its true promise.
We have some job to do.
I got loads of energy. We'll be fine.
Yes. Okay, everybody, and thank you for all your comments, and thank you, Imran, from all of these fantastic questions. Thank you for being in Brussels. It's again, it's an excellent booster shot for everybody which is based in Brussels, and I hope it's the same for you all. I'm just mentioning our next webinar, which will be 2 weeks from now, on monetizing misogyny with Lucina Dimeko from Sheep Persistent and Anna Fejos in Budapest, and which will be led by our dear Maria Giovanna Sessa at the EU DisinfoLab. Don't miss that one. You can register for this one on our newsletter, on our website. Feel free to come. Thank you again, Imran. Thank you again for this very powerful speech and to help us. Good luck with everything.
Thank you.
And we're going to be in touch anytime soon.
I know we will.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Ciao.